Who said worshiping wasn't fun? Huh? Man, are you guys lived up yet? This is fantastic. I love what's happening here at Rising Sun. Hey, if you've missed it, the whole month we've been talking about worship. We've been talking about what worship, what it is and what it isn't. And I just got to tell you, how many of you guys are like Hawkeye fans? Huh? Yeah. All right, how many of you are Cyclone fans? That's what I thought. So see, everyone in the room should just be excited because of the weekend that we had, right? How many, man, there were some crazy fans in those games too. I thought the whole stadium was going to come down, right? After we beat Minnesota, a top 10. That's the first time since what year?
2017.
I figured you would know, all right? First time since 2017 that Iowa Hawkeyes have beat a top 10 team. And you can just kind of see that worship is all around us. Like, that's just kind of who we are. And if you watched the Tube yesterday, or if you were at a game yesterday, you witnessed worship. Whether or not you like it or not, that's just kind of where it's at. And sometimes you're around people who just go all out when it comes to the things that they worship, right? How many of you have ever seen pictures of like crazy fans before? Yeah? So we had a crazy fan here at Rising Sun this morning, and as the team was warming up and as they were playing, I actually took a video of Jerry Montgomery. He was in the back dancing, like that song Undignified. He was kind of getting really into it there a little bit. Do we have that? Do we have that? I didn't know you could dance like that, Jerry. That's awesome. That's awesome. You could, yeah, go ahead and cut that off. That's enough of that. Wow. Give him a round of applause. He did a great job there, you bet. Now, I know sometimes, like, as we approach worship, this whole concept that we just experienced the last 10 minutes, some of you are like, I'm just not sure. Right? Yep, there it is, right there. That's kind of what some of you are like, you're kind of like, I just don't know. Right? That whole tamping your foot thing, clapping, getting a little silly. It's a little hard for us, isn't it, sometimes? And you know why? I've kind of been in that camp before. I was raised in that camp. I was raised in a small Baptist church where this was, whoa, they're a little weird, something's up. Like, they might have some sin in their life if they're doing that, right? I mean, that's kind of where we were. And so to come to, like, a place where you're just expressive and you're having fun and you're cutting loose, man, that can be a little intimidating at times. And so when we talk about worship, man, it's a lightning rod sometimes because it's so personal, right? Like how we express ourselves, it could just be one of those real emotionally charged subjects. But it's expressed in nature. Everywhere that we go, worship is expressed. And the reason that's true is because we were created for this. We were created for this. You are a created being by a creator to worship. Ultimately, when you strip everything down that worship is, it's an expression that comes back to the creator, just giving him glory, dancing before the king, and sometimes being expressive in nature, man, that draws attention, right? If you're like one of those old guys, dancing, did you see everyone in the video? They all kind of turned around and looked at him. And there's even somebody videotaping. And some people are really gravitating towards it, and others are like, I just don't know. Well, that's kind of how worship can be. Especially with our song selections, with the different styles that we sing. Sometimes we approach worship from a very conservative point of view. Or even as people engage with worship, if they get real expressive, sometimes it just has a way of drawing attention to themselves. And so there are some of us that, man, we sit on the sidelines and we're like, I just don't know. I just don't know if I can engage with that style. That's what makes this subject so personal and so difficult. But basically, worship is a celebration, right? I mean, I don't care which side of the conservative line you're on. Everyone agrees that worship is a celebration. It's joy, it's expression. See, that attention sometimes leads to opinions, and opinions, unfortunately, lead to criticism, right? We start to kind of point at those people and go, I'm just not sure that was real edifying at times. And that's what makes this subject so important, and that's part of why we've decided to talk about worship. And just full discretion, we just hired a creative arts minister. So what's that even mean for us as a church? What's it mean to really worship the Lord in joy? What's it really mean to really bring him a celebration and excitement? What's that even look like? See, I think worship, like I said earlier, can be seen all around us. I think it can be seen when you come home from work and your dogs are wagging their tails at the front door. Or your cat crawls up on your lap. Or for some of you who have really young kids, if you come home from work, dad or mom's coming home from work, or you're picking them up at the daycare, your kids, little bitty kids, are pretty excited to see you at times. Maybe it's even like it's expressed in Thanksgiving as we approach that season in the next couple of weeks. Now, Thanksgiving is its whole different ball of wax, because sometimes it's not received with great joy and celebration and excitement and anticipation. It's actually received with a lot of anxiety and fear and deprecation. It's kind of like, I just don't know if I want to go this year, right? Worship, Thanksgiving, holidays, it's all around us. The way that we interact with the world, and the way that all you have to do is just kind of watch. Worship is all around us. It happens, for me, sometimes like my favorite times of worship are when I'm in the deer stand and I'm watching nature come alive in the morning. And I'm watching the squirrels come out of their holes. I'm watching the birds kind of do a little shake before they start to fly. I love it when the deer walk up. Not just so I can harvest, but just from the pure joy of watching creation do its thing. Worship is all around us. Every one of us have experienced worship at some level. Worship can be shared in silence. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1 talks about this. It says that when the seal was popped open in Revelation, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. Can you imagine that moment? Can you imagine what it's like just to sit still? That's worship. Sometimes it's a scream of jubilation. That's worship. Sometimes it's when you're cheering for your fans or you're cheering for your team. Sometimes it's when you're saying, yes, God showed up. That's worship. It's all around us, and it has a very different feel depending on the situation. Sometimes worship can be sung in your living room when no one's watching. This happens to me. When I've got earphones on and I'm disconnected from the world and I'm in the Word and I'm just studying, there have been moments where I've stopped writing whatever's on my mind. And I close my eyes and I just start singing. And when that happens in my home, boy, that gets everyone's attention. I mean, people start coming out of the closets wondering what's going on to Dad. Like, is the cat hurt? I mean, what's happening, right? And I've got tears rolling down my eyes. I don't have an audience in front of me. Sometimes that's my most precious moments of worship. Maybe it's when you're singing at the top of your lungs in the shower. Worship is all around us. See, you were made for this. So all month long, what we want to do, okay, we want to invite you to help us with something, okay? Some of you have already received a response from this. Joey started this series. And he kind of talked about how this is in our DNA. This is our identity, that we were made for this. This isn't an option. This isn't, maybe you'll worship. This is you will worship. And the question isn't if you're worshiping. The question is what you're worshiping, or maybe more importantly, who you're worshiping. That's really kind of what we're diving into. That was our first week. And he introduced this card. And he asked people to grab a card and to help us identify for you how you worship God the best. So before you leave today, there's a couple of boxes. I want you to just be intentional about grabbing a card, putting your name on it. Tell us what your preferred contact method is, whether it's a cell phone or an email, and just write down what you believe you were made for. How do you express God in your fullest way? And the only reason we want to do that is we want to help navigate you through this calling and this giftedness and trying to bring others to Jesus. Because ultimately, that's what we're called to do as Christians and as believers, is to point people to Jesus, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing. And maybe for you, you want to do that, but your preferred method to worship isn't maybe singing, right? Some of you, your preferred method of worship is silence, okay? Maybe it's study, okay? Maybe it's sports, okay? Maybe it's working with your hands. All right, perfect. Tell us, where's your sweet spot in life? So before you leave, please fill one of these out, drop it in the box. The staff review those. It's not distributed to everybody. You're going to be getting a card from a team leader that just says, hey, we received your card. We appreciate your response, your partnership in this effort, and we want to help identify for you where God might be pointing you in ministry. Because there's plenty of opportunities for you to get around or to be able to bring yourself into the nature of God. So make sure that you grab a card before today. That's a simple action step. So where have we been? I already kind of teased it. Joey set us up 2 weeks ago. He said, listen, worship is not optional. We are created beings made by a creator, and we are called to worship. And the question isn't whether we're going to worship. It's not a question of if. It is a matter of what or whom. So that's where we started. Luke 19, chapter 19, verse 40 says that even the rocks will cry out if you remain silent, right? All of creation around us is designed to worship. And every part of worship is designed to bring him glory because there's a thumbprint of eternity on all of creation. And that's what we're called to do. So that was our first week. Last week, Gary he kind of built upon that concept, and he said, even though we're made for worship, there is a specific order to worship. There's a specific way to worship. It's kind of like, and he held up a clock. I don't know if you guys remember that or not. And for those of you who are gone, maybe you missed it, but he held up a clock, a timepiece, and he said, this is an indication that somebody created this, the craftsmanship that we can see. It, just by a logical design, tells us that it has a specific purpose in mind. And it's not a random assortment of mechanical gears and knobs and beauty. It's actually something much more intricate than that. It has a purpose, just like you have a purpose, and you were created for this. Now, if you were created to worship, there's probably a rhyme and a reason to that worship. And so we camped out in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 through 14. Just give you a quick reference point there. If you've never read those chapters, it's really incredible. It's very stimulating because as a believer, what Paul is telling this Corinthian church is, listen, hey, some of you guys are way too crazy in your worship. You have no order. And he ends chapter 14 with verse 33, and he says, listen, we have a God who is a God of order, and he wants to do things in a fitting way. That's how chapter 14 ends. So there's a specific order in place. And that order is in place, you know why? It's not for you. It's for the other people around you. So that you don't cause a distraction, so that you don't make an obscene scene and distract from what they're trying to do. So really the reason that we come together and we have a flow chart and we have a specific reason for the day is so that we can be intentional about what we're trying to communicate and who we're trying to communicate about. So we have timings on our worship service, but that's not in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, 13, and 14. He's just kind of telling the local church, there's a specific way to do this. There's a specific way to do this. And today, if that's all true, which it is, there are moments where you can step outside of corporate worship, and when you really analyze what worship is, man, it's just nuts. It's just absolutely bizarre. It's just absolutely crazy. And that's what we're talking about today. Some of my most crazy moments of worship has been when I'm walking out of a deer stand and I've got something on my mind, or we are dealing with something as a church, and I can remember one specific night where it was really heavy. It was probably the hardest thing I ever had to deal with. And I didn't trip and fall. I intentionally fell. Because I've seen the posture of worship in the Bible. I've seen what it looks like. It's literally submissive, being submissive to that order that we talk about. It's proper attitude and it's proper attributes. And so, that one specific night that I'm talking about in my mind, I just fell down. Arms extended, nose in the dirt, and I just wailed to God. And I said, God, I need you here. Rising Sun needs you here. That is crazy. If somebody were to have driven by and they see me laying out in a field like this in my hunting gear, you know what they think? I'm dead, right? And so what we're going to talk about today is that we have to kind of find a method through the madness. If there is a rhythm and if there is a rhyme to what we're trying to do, how can it still be random? And I think really ultimately the answer is this. It's random and it's crazy when it's yours. It's random and it's crazy when it's yours. When you get to that spot where you don't care who's around you and you're dancing before an audience of one, you'll go nuts. And if people were to see that, man, they would think you lost your marbles and you were off your rocker. And it's okay, because that is what worship is. And I've got some examples for you that I want to kind of chew through today and dissect and tease out. I'm going to ask you, though, as I walk through the first two examples, you don't have to turn there, you can. I'll give you the scripture references. You could write them down and look at them later this week. I want you to go to 1 Chronicles, not Corinthians, 1 Chronicles chapter 15, and I want you to try to find 2 Samuel chapter 6. Okay, you're going to kind of put two little thumbs in your Bibles, and if you've got your fake digital Bibles, that's fine. They'll work, I guess, for today. All right. We do have Bibles that are actually real and sharp underneath the chairs in front of you, so be careful. All right. So the first example of just kind of worship being crazy, worship being nuts, and worship not really fitting in a box, the one that really that I couldn't help but just camp out on was the example of Job. And many of you guys who have been in the church your whole life, you know the story of Job. You thought that maybe the book was called Job as you looked through the table of contents, but it actually is pronounced Job. Okay, so Job is an old guy. He's one of those guys that's been around for a long time. And chapter 1 is a real interesting chapter. How it starts out is, God's in heaven, and it says that Satan and his dominion kind of came into God's court, and God said, hey, what are you doing? Oh, I'm looking for somebody that I might be able to chew up and spit out. And God says in verse 8, weird story. Like in verse 8, chapter 1, he says, well, have you considered my servant Job? There is none who is more righteous or none who is as blameless as him. Could you imagine being in that spot where God could actually point you out in the world and tell Satan, hey, you want to test somebody? Go after this guy. Go after that cat. Go after her. Man, she's killing it in faith. You can't touch her. No matter what you do to her, I don't care what you afflict her with, you can't touch her. Her response will only be to respond to me in an appropriate way. Good luck. That's a challenge. And Satan basically says, challenge accepted. And so the narrative of Job chapter 1 starts out, it's really weird. It says that Satan leaves the Lord and he goes after Job. And it says the very first thing that he took out, okay, you ready for this? Very first thing that he took out were his oxen and his mules. Okay, so what's that mean? Well, what's that have to do with anything? So Job was not only was he righteous, but he's really wealthy, and he had really been given a lot of favor. And so oxen and mules in that day basically meant machinery. One day he goes out, all of his combines, all of his tractors, all the tires had fallen off. I mean, they're gone. There's nothing he can do. All of the gears are gone. They're all rusted tight. And if Dave Gibson or Joe Patterson or any of our other farmers in the room had a day like that, you'd go, oh my goodness, right? Especially today, especially in this season, because it's difficult to get things done when your oxen are gone and when your mules are gone. And then it says, as he heard that news, another servant runs in. He says, Job, I got to tell you, man, I was out. There was a fireball from heaven, consumed all of your sheep. I have no idea what to do. What do you mean? Yeah, everything's gone. All those little fur balls, those cotton balls, it's not cotton anymore, man. It's ash. And Job's like, what? Sheep was basically the cultural equivalent of your liquid asset. It's what your currency was. It's your bank just went to zero. You open your accounts and it's gone. Everything's gone that you've worked to build. So now your machinery's gone and your livestock's gone. Third thing that was gone, another messenger comes in. He says, hey, all your camels, somebody came off and they stole all your camels, Job. Camels, you know what that is? That's transportation. So now all your cars are gone. You can't escape this mess. You can't go to try to fix it somewhere else. This is a big, big, big deal. And as he's finishing his dialogue, a fourth messenger rolls into the house. He says, Job, I don't know how to tell you this. All your kids, you know that Friday feast that they do? They're all dead. A great wind came and destroyed everybody. You know what kids represented? Represented your future. So now everything that you have and everything that you would have had is completely gone. You know what Job's response is? Listen to this. Go ahead and go to my next one here, would you? At this time, Job gets up he tears his robes off, he shaves his head, and he falls to the ground. That took some time. This is how he responds to this tragedy. He gets up. He's in shock, no doubt. He tears his robes. He shaves his head. And I don't know what he's thinking when he's shaving his head. I'm sure he's bawling. I'm sure he's just destroyed. And he just falls down. No one's watching. There's not a lot of jubilance here. There's not a lot of celebration here. You know what it says? You know why he fell down? Here's the next part of this verse. It's Job chapter 1, verse 20. You can check it out. The next part of this verse says, he falls down in worship. It's the first time we see the word worship chronologically in the Bible. First time we see the word worship chronologically in the Bible. He falls down. Travesty. Another time that we see this crazy moment of worship. We've talked about this in the past, but for those guests and maybe people who have not been here for a while, Philippians. The Philippian church, they would have experienced this. They knew all about what we're about to talk about because they lived it. But in Acts chapter 16, it says that Paul and Silas and his companions were actually trying to go to the Turkey area. They were trying to continue to do ministry. They had been in some churches. They wanted to go back and say, hi, how's it been? And basically what happened was God told Paul, no, you can't go the way that you want to go. You need to go to a direction I want to send you. And so Paul and his companions got up the next morning and they take off across the sea and they go over to Philippi. And you know what they're trying to do? All they're trying to do is just witness. All they're trying to do is point people to Jesus. After being led to a city where God had pointed them to go, after casting out a demon of a young girl, after healing this little girl in this town, after telling people about Jesus, after being flogged, after being beaten, after being put in prison with your hands and your feet against a wall, after being put in the darkest part of the dungeon at midnight. At midnight. This isn't Sunday morning at 9. This is midnight. I'm exhausted. Jesus, you just asked me to come to this place. I've been telling people all about you, and I've just healed this little girl from a demon, and now I've been beaten, I've been flogged, my companions are with me, we've been put in this dark cell, I'm cold, my hands are bound, my feet are bound, I'm uncomfortable at midnight. This is what it says they did. Paul and Silas were praying. They were singing hymns to God. And the other prisoners, at midnight, were listening. They were listening. Those two little stories, we could really camp out on and do a lot there. This is not the main point of my sermon, because there's others. And there's one main point that we're going to talk about with the storyline. But you know what these two things tell me about worship? It's this. The call to worship seldom comes at the most convenient times. The call to worship seldom comes at the most convenient times. And a lot of times, it actually will draw a crowd. It will draw a crowd. So when you really are cutting loose and you are crying out to God, even when it doesn't make sense, even when others, if they were to see you, would say, you're nuts. That is what God is chasing. That is what we are pursuing at Rising Sun. Crazy worship. Not sitting in the pews and doing this. Not that that's bad, right? Not that that's bad. But if we're here to really celebrate what God's doing, maybe our attitude should be in check here a little bit. Do you realize who we're singing to? This next story that I asked you to kind of turn to earlier, I want to set it up a little bit. So I want you to first be in First Chronicles chapter 15. That's the very first page that I want you to be in first. So I'll get my Bible there too. Now let me set up what's happening. And actually, let me go to chapter 13 first. First Chronicles chapter 13. It's in the Old Testament. Now, as you're analyzing Chronicles and as you're going to analyze Samuel, I want you to know this. 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings are being written as those things are happening. All right? Let me say it again. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings are are being written as those events are happening. So every time a new king would come in, after that king would die, there would be a scribe, and he would basically summarize what was going on in Israel's history as it was happening. Are you with me? First and Second Chronicles, you know when this is written? It's after all of the histories are gone. It's when they're in bondage in Persia. And some scribe is writing basically the history of all of Israel, and it starts with Adam, and it goes all the way to their return to Jerusalem. So as you look at these two books, you're going to see very similar content, but Chronicles follows the southern kingdom more than the First and Second Samuel and Kings, okay? A little context there. So here's where we're at. If you'll look in chapter 13, David conferred with each of his officers, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds, and then he said to the whole assembly of Israel, if it seems good to you, and if it's the will of the Lord, let's send word far and wide to the rest of our brothers throughout the territories of Israel, and also to the priests and the Levites who are with them in their towns and pasture lands, to come join us. Let us bring the ark of our Lord back to us, for we did not inquire of it during the reign of Saul. Now, let me just kind of set the stage. All right, so David has just invited all of his cabinet people, and he said, hey, I got this idea. I know it's kind of crazy. Saul never talked to the ark. He never, brought the Ark of the Covenant back, and you guys remember when it was taken, right? Like 65 years ago it was taken, all right? So that's the context that I want you guys to know. So the last time that we really saw the Ark of the Covenant was actually in 1 Samuel chapter 6, okay? 2 Samuel chapter 6 and 1 Chronicles chapter 15 are the same little section in history. So we're back in time 65 years. Here's what's going on. There was a guy by the name of Eli. Eli was a priest. Okay, he was the priest before Samuel, and he had two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, and they were just idiots, all right? They were off the rocker for sure. They did not follow the Lord, and they thought that the Ark of the Covenant was kind of like this magic rabbit foot and magic lamp, that if they rubbed it hard enough, then God would actually bring favor to them. So they take it out into battle against the Philistine people. And the Philistines actually had captured the Ark of the Covenant. Hophni and Phinehas die. When the news of Hophni and Phinehas die comes back to their dad Eli, Eli falls over and dies too. All right, kind of weird in the storyline, but that's what's going on. So now the Ark of the Covenant is gone from Israel's narrative. The Philistines have it. They do what comes natural. They take this little treasure box that's called the Ark of the Covenant, right, that has a bowl of manna and a budding staff of Aaron and the 10 Commandments, and it's plated with gold. I mean, this was a huge victory for the Philistine people. They take that box and they put it in their temple of Dagon. Dagon was their god. The very next morning, the priest of Dagon, they come in, they're like, woo, Dagon, you're awesome, right? And when that happens, they come in, Dagon actually falls down. The statue of Dagon is face down before the Ark of the Covenant. The priests are like, well, that's a little weird. Well, maybe we ought to just put that thing back up and not tell anybody. So that's what they do. They put it back up. The very next day, they come back in. Guess what? Dagon's down again, facing the Lord. And you know what's going on? This time, his head and his hands fell off. The Philistines are like, oh, that's a bad deal. And then it says that the Lord actually sent plagues to the Philistines. It got their attention. Here's what he did to them. And I know it's weird. Read your Bible sometime. You'll find it's very fascinating if you really dive in. It says that he gave them hemorrhoids. All right? The Philistines went, oh, maybe we shouldn't have this thing. Hey, Frank, is something going on downstairs? Yeah, I've got it too. Let's get rid of this box. And so they send it back to the Israelites. That's what happens, all right? Now, fast forward a little bit. This is so weird to me how the Bible writes it, how God kind of records history and preserves it through for us. Here's what happens. Some farmers are just minding their business, they're hoeing their ground, and all of a sudden an ox, 2 cows, with a cart comes up the hill, and guess what? It's the Ark of the Covenant. And they're like, oh, it's back. That's pretty cool. They get a little curious. They open the lid. When they open the lid, about 50,000 of them die. The Israelites. And they call Samuel. Hey, the box came back. What do we do? He comes, he blesses them, and is like, all right, we don't really know what to, let's just keep it here. So you know what they do with the box? They bury it. They're careful with it. They're cautious with it. They whisper. They're reverent. They're cautious. I think it's kind of what sometimes we do. We're afraid sometimes to raise our hand before our Lord. It's scary sometimes to clap because you might clap off beat. It's sometimes kind of uncomfortable to dance or to sway. And so we're careful and we're cautious, just like the Israelites were. Okay, so it stays there for a little while. It's been 65 years that has gone by. And David says, let's bring it back. Rising sun, let's bring it back. Let's bring it back. Let's go. Let's dance before the Lord. Let's go crazy, maybe. What if we all stopped worrying about what everyone else thought? How nuts would that be? So that's where the story starts. Okay? So real quick, I'm going to fast forward. You ready? So I want you to turn real quick to 2 Samuel chapter 6. Let's look at what David says. Okay? So David brings together all of Israel. Look at how many are there. Chapter 6, 2 Samuel. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1. David brings 30,000 people together. You know why? Because we're going to celebrate because he's coming back home. Now, they don't know what to do. So they basically get together and they have a bunch of instruments and they go nuts and they're throwing footballs and everyone's happy and everyone's excited. And Uzzah, one of the grandsons or sons of the guy that's actually holding on to this box, it's coming across the threshold. He's like, I don't want it to tip. So he reaches out. He forgets about the 50,000 people that died. And you know what? He's trying to stabilize the ark because he's used to it. It's been around his home, right? And when the ark tips, Uzzah touches and Uzzah dies. You know what? David and everybody else stopped singing. I think we might have done something a little wrong. So that, again, they slip back into fear. For the next 3 months, it stays at this guy's house, Obed. And it says, now we're going to flip back again, same story, just different narrative. We're going to go back to 1 Chronicles chapter 15. Look at what happens. David, after 3 months of studying, he understands what's going on. There was an order to worship, and he missed it. There was an order to worship. There's a reason. There's a rhyme. There's a method. Verse 13. David has assembled all these people. This is 3 months after Uzzah dies, and he says this. It was because you, the Levites, did not bring it up the first time that the Lord our God broke out in anger against us. Do you remember what we read in chapter 13 of 1 Chronicles? Who did David confer with? David gathered all his cabinet people, and he said, hey, if this makes sense to you, it makes sense to me. Let's go do this thing, right? You know what they didn't do? They didn't ask God. They didn't say, God, is this how you want us to do this? And so he says that back in chapter 15. He says, we did not inquire of God about how to do this in the prescribed way. So the priests and the Levites had consecrated themselves in order to bring up the Ark of the Covenant, the God of Israel. The Levites, they carried up the Ark, and everyone goes crazy. As the Ark is coming into the city, okay, as the Ark is coming into the city, David is dancing. It says he's dancing with all of his might. He's doing everything he can. That's 2 Samuel chapter 6 language. It says that he's wearing this linen ephod, and he's just going nuts. And as he's going nuts, everybody's celebrating. Everyone's excited. Everyone's jubilant. Man, God is back. God is back. God is back. Except for there's one person who is upstairs. They were watching out of a window. And it was David's first wife. And he walks upstairs and he's excited. I mean, God is finally back home. This is when we celebrate. This is how we celebrate. We figured it out. Let's dance before the Lord now. Let's go crazy. And she said, oh man, how much you've really flattered yourself. Like, did you see all those young girls? Boy, they are really googly-eyed on you now, David. You are a fool. And David says, he says this in 2 Samuel chapter 6. Listen, Michal, I was dancing before the Lord, and I will become even more undignified than this. You think that was crazy? You should watch what I'll do next. You think that was nuts? You should watch what I'll do next. See, David's physical expression reflected his spiritual condition. David didn't care about his office. He didn't care that he was the king of Israel. He didn't care about his position. He didn't care about what was proper. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't even care what you were thinking, because God was there. He saw his current situation as a culmination of God's pursuit of him and of his people. And so his mind and his heart and his body were pursuing God with everything he had. So he was offering his body as an expression in crazy dancing. That's what it says, as a form of worship. He was dancing and he was singing and he was acting nuts in front of God, not you. He didn't care what you thought. And if he didn't care what people thought, maybe we shouldn't care what people think. All right? There should always be kind of a proper order to things. But when it's real, when it's raw, when it's passionate, when it's yours, try it sometime. It's nuts. Romans chapter 12 says this, that we should offer our bodies, do you remember what it says? As what? Living sacrifices. This is holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. So let me just tell you the 5 takeaways that I've got with this basic message, all right? I've got 5 direct applications for you. The first one is pretty simple. I think sometimes we need to turn God's voice up and turn people's volumes down. I think we should listen more to what God thinks than what people think as we worship. Okay, that's pretty easy. Do you remember chapter 13 versus chapter 15? He worried about what the people thought versus what God thought. And as he transitioned and as he started to learn what the proper order of things were, he actually started to care more about what God thought than what people thought. So I think for me, my takeaway, I'm going to worry more about God's voice than your volume. Okay? That's the first takeaway I'm going to have. Second takeaway I'm going to have is I'm going to be orderly when I'm around you. Okay? I'm going to be orderly when I'm around you, but when it's just me, I'm going to go crazy. All right? And sometimes you've been dealing with something and it's appropriate for you just to put your hands in the air. Maybe it's okay for you to clap out of rhythm at times. Maybe it's okay for you to even tap your foot, because that's what God's asking of you. Because he wants to ask you, do you care more about what they're thinking or do you care more about what I'm thinking? So when it's just me and God, man, I'm going to go nuts every single time. Third one that I've got. Worship, don't watch. Don't be like Michal. I'm going to celebrate, not criticize. I'm going to dance. I'm not going to despise like Michal did in her heart with David. These are going to be the things that I keep in check. I don't care what you're doing because I'm dancing in front of him. I'm not even watching you. I'm worshiping him. I'm not even going to criticize what you do. I don't care if your armpits smell. I don't care if you're going nuts. I don't care if you clap out a beat, because I am celebrating my God. I'm not going to be criticizing you. The third thing, I'm not going to despise you. I'm going to dance. And then the fourth application I've got is my celebration. I need to know this. My celebration I put that first and then I thought, nope, it will. My celebration will be criticized as being a little too crazy. It doesn't matter if you're sitting here like this, or if you're doing this, or if you're spinning around, right? It's going to be criticized. Because worship's personal. Ultimately, here's my last point. Be sure to leave a little room for a little more crazy. Did you hear David's words? He said, you thought that was crazy, watch this. So church, it's time to stand up. Church, it's time to worship. Let's go. Let's get a little nuts. All right? Here we go. Here we go.